Hey all, Brian S. Pratt here. So I'm going to read chapter 1 of the third book of the Morcyth Saga, entitled Warrior Priest of Dmon-Li. Now, a quick recap. In book 1, James was looking for a job, went to an interview, ended up on this other world. He had to learn magic, and ended up, he found a boy named Miko, who became his companion. And at the end of book 1, they were in the City of Light when it fell to the Empire. Now, book 2, Michael was taken as a slave, and James, with some newfound friends, went to the very southern depths of the Empire to rescue him. And chaos and destruction ensued. He was successful in that he rescued Michael, and while Michael was enslaved in the iron mines of Sorna, he made friends with a guy named Nate. Now, Nate has a family, and when they fled the iron mines, they went to his estate on the island of Corellian. I'm sorry, city of Corellian on the island of Torrance, which is in the southern islands on off the southern shore of the empire. And that's where we begin book 1 now, or book 3. Now keep in mind, I'm not professional. And as I read through this, I will talk about things. So I'm going forward with the idea that everyone who's listening to this has already read it. So there are spoilers ahead. This is not an ebook. This is just me talking about this chapter, the things that come up in it, things that have happened on the situations that happen, people, and what may happen in the future. So if you haven't read the series yet, be warned, spoilers ahead. So when we start this book, James and Miko and Jiron are on the island of Torrance in the trading city of Corellian in Nate's family's estate. And here we go. Oh, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. If I get like 2,000 subscribers, I can actually start making money from these, which would be nice, since book sales really aren't that great. Anyway, like, share, comment, things like that. It keeps me motivated. So, chapter 1, Warrior Priest of Dmon-Li. James walked down one of the many hallways in the Fertillon estate. Fertillon is the family name of Nate Fertillon, part of the great trading city of Corellian, situated at the southern end of the island of Torrance. Corellian boasted one of the largest shipping ports in these waters. Its trading houses shipped goods to all the known kingdoms. Many had offices in every major city and capital. He paused in front of a door he had entered many times over the past 7 days, ever since they were brought there by Nate's cousin after fleeing the destruction of the mines. Now, if you remember, when at the very end of the book they boarded a ship and were setting sail, as it happened, it was owned by Nate's cousin, and that's the cousin that he's referring to. Knocking, he waited until he heard a come in from the other side before opening the door. Inside, he found Miko sitting in a chair next to Nate, who laid in a bed, recovering from the effects of the poison consumed when Blacktooth had tried to extract his revenge upon Miko. Miko had been poisoned as well, but hadn't consumed as much and had suffered hardly any ill effects. When they... Oh, and I will be making them corrections too. When they had arrived in Corellian, the captain immediately took Nate to the nearest temple, where he arranged for a priest to purge the poison from his system. Once the poison had been neutralized, the priest had told them his internal damage was far-reaching and that it would take a long time, if ever, for him to fully recover from the effects. Now, I know in role-playing, priest cast spells, boom, and you're as good as new. I just don't think it would be that way. I just don't. And so in my world, the priest will heal you, but recovery time is still there and ill effects can still happen. I'm sure it also depends on the priesthood you go to, the priest who's doing it, and who you are and how much you're paying them. Feeling better today? He asked Nate as he came and sat upon the edge of the bed. Some, he replied with a raspy voice. Still racked by pain, he at least could hold down solids and move around on his own for a short time. James turned to Miko. Jiron and I are ready to leave for Cardri. A pained look came over Miko. What about me? James glanced toward Nate before replying. Nate's family has offered to let you remain here for a long time as you desire. That's right, Miko, Nate added. We'd be more than happy to have you. But, he said as he looked to Nate, pausing momentarily. Then he continued, as much as I appreciate the offer to stay, I think I should go with them when they leave. He looked to James for his response. James glanced again to Nate and said, I thought we should at least give him the choice. Nate nodded in reply. Turning to Miko, James said, Then we leave in the morning. There's a trader with whom Nate's father arranged to carry us with them as they make their way toward Cardri. They have several stops before they arrive, but said they should be docking at the capital within a couple of weeks. No matter how many times you fix something, every time you reread it, you gotta fix it again. Tomorrow? He asked, sad to be leaving his friend so soon. He turned to Nate and said, I'm sorry to have to leave you. Nate lifted his hand and patted him on the knee. It's okay, Miko, I understand. Remember, you always have a friend in me, and if you're ever in the area, I expect you to stop for a visit. Giving him a sad smile, Miko replied, I will. He turned to James. I'd like to stay here with Nate until we leave in the morning. Sure thing, James assured him. Now, I need to arrange a few things with Jiron before we go. Getting up from the bed, he went to the door. Looking back at Nate, he said, You get better. Nate smiled and replied, I will. Opening the door, he left the room and then closed it behind him. He proceeded down the hallway toward the room he shared with Jiron. On the way, he saw Essen coming toward him, and he wore the livery of House Fertulon. Essen, as you recall, in Book 2, was the leader of Miko's slave mining team. He was a fair man, treated them well, and stood up for Miko when Blacktooth was after him. So he's a good guy. So you've taken service with him then? Smiling broadly, Essen replied, Yes, both Errol and I have. Errol was the other slave that had jumped aboard at the last minute when they fled the volcanic eruption which had consumed the slave mines. They put in a good word with his father on our behalf, and they made us part of their servant staff. Not a glamorous position, to be sure, but better than what we had a few weeks ago. Laughing, James nodded in agreement. You got that right. I wish nothing but the best for both of you. Thank you. I don't know if I've expressed my thanks for the fair treatment you gave Miko when he was part of your team in the mines. Well, I always believe that if you treat someone with respect and fairly, they'll work harder for you. I've found that to be true, too. I must be off, Essen said. Can't afford to make a bad impression with the master of the house. Good luck, Essen, James said as he walked away. You too, James. Leaving him behind, James proceeded down the hallway, admiring the tapestries on the way to the stairs leading down to where his room was located. Once down the stairs, he turned to the right and came to his room, which was the third doorway on the right. He found Jiron had already left, probably to find another servant girl to spend time with. Jiron often took the servant girls to the inner atrium at the end of the hallway, where he said the plants helped to get them in the mood. The atrium was roughly 40 feet by 60, with an open ceiling that allowed the sun, and at times the rain, to fall upon the many plants. 3 benches sat along the cobblestone walkways that meandered their way amongst the plants. It was on one of those benches that he found Jiron sitting and talking with Nate's sister, Miriam. That's when we took off and left the soldiers far behind, he said to her. James saw her sitting in rapt attention as his friend related another tale of their exploits. He had wooed several of the servant girls as well as Miriam, much to the chagrin of Nate's mother. That's partially the reason why they agreed to expedite their return to Cardri. Ahem, James said, clearing his throat to announce his presence. Turning to look over his shoulder, Jiron saw him standing at the entrance to the atrium and gave him a grin as he said, Hi. James gave him a nod, then said to her, Good day, Miriam. She stood in reply and gave him a shy smile as she said, Jiron was just telling me about your escape from Al-Kur. It's amazing you both got out of there alive. Yeah, it was, he said. Luck was definitely on our side that day. Turning to Jiron, he said, I told Michael we're leaving, and he's decided to come with us. Thought he might, he said. Though if it wasn't for Tersa needing me, he flashed Miriam a smile, I'd never leave. I must go, Miriam said abruptly as she got up from the bench and rushed past James as she hurried from the atrium. Wonder what made her, he began to say, then saw Miriam's mother enter from the other direction. As she approached, Jiron came to his feet and gave her a slight bow. Greetings, lady. Flirting with my daughter again, have you? She said with a none too happy expression. Just whiling away the time before we leave. I've spoken with Captain Carroll, and he said all this. I have spoken with. Hang on. That's better. And he said all is. He said everything is arranged. Yeah. Everything is arranged. She explained. They will leave at first light. Good, exclaimed Jiron. Though I've enjoyed the hospitality of your home, I am anxious to return and rejoin my sister. Yes, chimed in James, you and your family have been most gracious in allowing us to stay with you. She turned a warm smile to James as she said, it's the least we can do for having our Nate returned. I had given up all hope of ever seeing my son again. Michael will be going with us as well, he explained. I told him of your offer, but his mind is set to continue with us. That's too bad, she said. Nate has grown very fond of him. He's a good lad. That he is, James agreed. She turned to leave, but paused and turned back toward them, saying, we're having a banquet tonight in your honor to send you off properly. I took the liberty of arranging for suitable attire to be brought to your rooms later this afternoon. Thank you, James said to her graciously. You're welcome, she replied as she again turned and made her way from the atrium. James turned to Jiron. You should stay away from Miriam until we leave. I don't intend to do anything with her, he assured him. Truth be told, she was the one who found me. I was sitting here relaxing when she showed up and started talking to me. Before I even knew it, she had me relating the tale of our escape from Al-Kur. Be that as it may, he said, we're not out of here yet, and an angry mother can delay our way back to Cardri. I'll do my best to avoid being around her. James nodded and replied, that'll be just fine. Wonder what suitable attire is. Don't know, James replied. I'm sure it's probably stiff and uncomfortable. A groan escaped Jiron as he rolled his eyes. They returned to the room, and as they neared their door, saw one of the servants leaving. The servant failed to notice them as he shut the door and walked away in the opposite direction. With trepidation, they opened the door and entered. Lying on each bed was indeed a set of clothes. One had bright green tights and a darker green upper tunic. The other had light brown tights with a dark brown upper tunic. They raced for the brown set, and Jiron cried out in triumph as he got to them first. Ha ha ha, my peacock, he said, holding the brown set. Oh, shut up, James replied as he went and held up the other. I hate green, he said miserably. He turned to Jiron with an imploring look. No way, man, he said, and then indicated the clothes James held. I'd rather go naked than wear that. He took off his clothes and put the new ones on. When he saw James hesitating, he asked in all seriousness, You don't want to insult our hostess, do you? Then a playful smile spread across his face. Resigned to his fate, he replied, No. He removed his clothes and first slipped on the bright green tights. He looked down at himself and realized they were truly tight and formed to his every curve down there, leaving nothing to the imagination. Feeling naked, he pulled on the tunic, which helped to cover his nether regions, though not as well as he would have wanted. Despite being rather revealing, they were quite comfortable. Once dressed, he looked in the mirror. Aside from the fact that he was green, the outfit looked pretty sharp on him. Jiron had his own set on as well, and they looked at each other, nodding in admiration. Actually, James, he said when he saw him, it doesn't look that bad once you have them on. He came over and joined him in front of the mirror. You look pretty good, too. It's still another hour till mealtime, Jiron said. Let's say we go and show off our new clothes to some of the serving girls. Smiling at his friend, he replied, You go ahead. I'm going to find Michael. He's probably still sitting with Nate. I need to make sure he's ready for the celebration. All right, then. Going to the door, Jiron opened it and paused a moment as he said, See you there. Shutting the door behind him, he headed down the hallway to find one of the several serving girls he'd been impressing since his arrival. Under his tunic, James strapped on his slug belt. He hadn't felt safe anywhere since coming to this crazy world, and he liked to be prepared. A couple days ago, while they were sightseeing in the city, he found a store where he restocked his supply of slugs. Sitting over in the corner of the room was a box holding 100 of them. When Miriam had found out why he wanted them, she bought him the box. Straightening his tunic so it better hid his belt of slugs, he left the room and made his way back up the stairs to Nate's room. He knocked but received no answer. Knocking again, he waited, but no reply was forthcoming. Opening the door a crack, he peeked in and discovered Nate and Miko were no longer there. Closing the door, he continued down the hallway toward where they had put Miko. Being Nate's friend and had warranted him a room to himself next door. As he approached Miko's room, he heard arguing coming from inside. It sounded a bit heated. Fearing the worst, he raised a slug and burst through the door. Standing in the middle of the room was Miko, bright red tights in hand and a stubborn look on his face. Nate sat in a chair and it seemed as if they had been arguing. "James," Miko said, holding the clothes out to him, "do you realize what they expect me to wear?" Turning to Nate, he said, "If I have to wear this, then I'm not going." "Miko," James said to him as he entered the room, "we're their guests, and if they want us to wear these things, then wear them we shall. It's the least we can do for the hospitality we've received." "But," he started to say, and then stopped abruptly when he realized what James had on. Breaking into a laugh, he dropped his clothes and sat in a nearby chair. "Man, would you look at you," he said, and then started laughing. Turning a little red, James turned to Nate, who said, "You do look good, James. It's what everyone will be wearing." "Come on, Torchy," James said to Miko as he came over and picked up the flaming red clothes from the floor. Handing them to him, he said, "Put them on." "Torchy?" Miko asked when he calmed down. "Why did you call me that?" Pointing to the clothes, he replied, "Wearing that will make you look like a flaming candle." Nate broke into a smile at Miko's expense. Looking forlorn, Miko held the clothes and said to James with a slight whine in his voice, "Do I have to?" "Yes, you do," he told him. "Now stop bemoaning your circumstances and put them on. Our hosts are expecting it." Under James's glare, he got into his new clothes, and sure enough, he looked like a flaming candle. When he looked at James for approval, he did his best not to. He did his best to not smile. He did his best to not smile. He did his best not to smile. I'm thinking not to smile. "You look good." "You sure?" he asked as he looked down at himself, not entirely convinced. "Glad my friends in Baron aren't here to see this." Baron, as you recall, in Book 1 is where James encountered Miko for the first time. He was a street kid, still a kid, and circumstances threw them together. "Are you coming to the celebration?" James asked Nate. Nodding, he replied, "Yes. In a few minutes, my servants will arrive and help me into my attire for the evening. You fellows can go ahead. I'm sure they won't be upset if you're a little early." "All right," agreed James. "Are you going to need help returning to your room?" Nate shook his head and held up his walking stick. "I can make it that far on my own." Getting up, he leaned heavily upon his stick as he shuffled toward the door. "Going to have to get used to this at some point." James held it open for him as he passed through. "Thanks," he said as he went by. Once he was out, James shut the door and turned back to Miko. "Relax. You do look nice." "So do you," he replied. "Sorry I laughed." Smiling, James said, "Don't worry about it. I do look somewhat funny in these clothes. I just hope we're not the only ones to be wearing something like this." "Me too. Shall we go?" "Might as well get this over with," Miko sighed. Holding the door open, "After you, Torchy." Miko gave him an annoyed look and said, "Would you stop calling me that?" "Okay, sorry," he apologized, not looking the least bit apologetic. They left the room and headed downstairs to the banquet hall, where they found the servants still putting up the last of the decorations. Banners and flowers were everywhere, giving the room a festive and cheerful feel. Over to one side, a dozen musicians were setting up on a stage. James was intrigued by the different instruments. Shortly came the beginnings of them tuning their instruments, reminiscent of his own short stint in the school band. He played the trumpet. I played the trumpet, and that's where that trumpet came from. But I started in the 7th grade, and I was first chair in 8th grade, then high school, and I believe when I became a junior, first chair, junior, first chair, senior. I was pretty good. They saw their hostess, decked out in a flowing lavender dress and marshaling her servants like a general on the eve of battle. She continually barked orders, and her soldiers snapped to obey. Noticing them in their new clothes, she gave them a nod of approval before returning to the business of getting the hall ready in time. I'm just going to make that say getting the hall ready. Miriam walked in through a door on the other side of the hall. A flowing blue dress with intricate embroidery about the chest and bodice, she made a striking figure. She motioned for them to follow her as she made her way to the main entrance. "My, don't we look fine," she said when they joined her. "You too, milady," Michael said as he gave her a slight bow. "Don't milady me," she said, flashing him a smile. "This isn't going to start for a while. Why don't we go outside for a bit? James, there's someone I'd like you to meet." "Oh?" "She's a friend of mine, and I've been telling her all about your exploits, the ones Jiron has been kind enough to share." Tongue suddenly gone dry, his stomach made with the butterflies as he followed her down the hallway to the door leading outside. Meeting new people, especially of the female persuasion, had never been easy for him. And it hadn't been for me either. I think my first date was when I was 21. Yeah, I was a shed-in book reading recluse. My mom had no problems with me at all when I was a boy. As they approached, Miriam whispered to him, "She's the daughter..." Oh, hang on. When he passed through the door, he saw a girl standing off by herself under a nearby tree. She was a year or two younger than he, and very lovely. Brown hair flowed past her shoulders, and she wore a beautiful dress of blue with a stylish design stitched about the hem. As they approached, Miriam whispered to him, "She is the daughter of one of the shippers on the island, a family of high standing." When they came close, she made the introductions. "James," she said, "this is Meliana. Meliana, this is James and Miko." She gave him a curtsy. "Nice to meet you." So this is the first instance where we meet Meliana. And I don't think I really can't remember them ever meeting again in the Morcyth Saga. They might have, but I can't recall it. Well, eventually I'll get to it. And so how did Light in the Barren Lands happen? I don't know. Well, I guess I do know, but I don't really have that. I never wrote that. But did I think in this moment that she was going to marry James? Hey, I told you there'd be spoilers. Yeah, I'm drinking water now. My girlfriend says I shouldn't be drinking pop when I do this because I burp too much. Okay. I don't think I had it in my mind that she was going to be a love interest. I do recall that I had several, I think on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, one of the two, several reviews saying how there were no real female, female characters, no relationships, no lovey-dovey stuff. And to be honest, I was never interested in that, so I didn't write it. But I realized that that's part of life, and so I started to pay more close attention to it. So I started throwing some more stuff in there. I did originally in the first book, before James met Miko. No, so was it after? No, it was after James met Miko. He was in Castle Cardri and saw the princess. I kind of thought maybe I was going to do something with that, but this turned out pretty good. Okay, as they approached, she gave him a curtsy. "Nice to meet you." When he stood tongue-tied for a moment, Michael elbowed him in the ribs, which snapped him out of it. He said, his voice barely audible due to the dryness of his throat. He swallowed and then said, "Pleased to meet you too, Meliana." Miriam has told me so much about you," she said as she took his arm. They began to walk leisurely around the grounds. "You must be very brave." "Well," he started, but then had to clear his throat to try to keep his voice from cracking. "Well, I suppose so. But at the time, I didn't feel very brave. You just do what you have to." "Ooh," she says. She grips his arm tighter. "I'd love to hear it." Nothing makes a guy feel better than to play on his ego, right? What could he say that wouldn't involve telling her about magic? The fact that he could do magic was still something he wanted very few to know. They walked for a moment before he began to describe the jailbreak back at Mountainside. While he spoke, she continued to ooh and ah at all the right times, making him feel very good. Nothing boosted a man's ego more than a pretty girl hanging on to every word he had to say. Michael walked along behind him, disgusted at the whole sight. From atop the estate, they heard a musical chime ring out. It's time to return to the hall. The banquet will be starting soon. As they made their way back, Meliana continued holding onto James's arm. As they reached the front doors, a man stepped from within and stopped in front of them. "Papa!" Meliana exclaimed happily. "This is James, the one I've been telling you about." Her father gave a small smile as he reached out a hand. "Nice to meet you, young man." James took the hand and said, "You too, sir." The father eyed James appraisingly and gave a barely perceptible nod. Turning to his daughter, he said, "It's time for us to take our place at the table." "Nice to have met you, James," he said as he held his arm out for his daughter. She released James's arm, much to his dismay, and hooked her arm to her father's. He turned and led her into the banquet hall, a slight limp in his walk as if his leg bothered him. "I think he liked you," Miriam told him. James just shrugged. "Didn't matter. We're leaving in the morning anyway." He gazed at Meliana as she and her father entered the hall. Michael tugged his sleeve and asked, "Shouldn't we go in too?" Snapping out of his reverie, James said, "Yeah, sure." Following Miriam into the hall, they were led up to the main table where the Furlongs would sit. Nate was already there at the place of honor, and he gestured for them to come and sit next to him. Michael took the seat immediately to his left, while James sat next to Michael. Shortly, Jiron came in and made his way over to sit next to James. "Did you find your admirers?" James asked as he sat down. Giving him a big smile, he replied, "Yes. 2, actually." The musicians off to the side began to play, and their music gave the hall a gaiety it had lacked. The musicians were quite skillful, though perhaps not in Parollin's league. James found himself watching the musicians as they played the unfamiliar instruments, finding it all very intriguing. Parollin, of course, is the bard that they met on the road to Cardri in the first book. James saved his life, and so forth, and he has a recurring role throughout the whole series. Strangely, though, he has not been in the first 3 of Travail. I wonder where he's at. Wonder what happened to him. Will he come back? I don't know. We'll find out, won't we? Anyone out there want to see Parollin return? From a table farther down the hall, James caught Meliana sneaking glances his way. When she noticed him looking at her, she gave him a large smile and a brief, unobtrusive wave. He nodded and smiled back to her before turning his attention to watch the other guests arrive. Many were dressed in similar attire to what he and the others wore, no longer making him feel quite so conspicuous. From the number of other men wearing similar garb, it truly did seem to be the current fashion trend. Okay, the tights I'm referring to, watch Errol Flynn, Robin Hood, that's what I'm talking about. Will Scarlet. His outfit is what I envision Michael in. The mother took her seat while the father... once the tables were mostly filled with guests, the doors to the side of the hall opened and Nate's parents walked in. The band struck up a processional-style tune as they entered and approached the head table where James and the others sat. The mother took her seat while the father continued to stand. The band came to a halt and the hall grew quiet. Gazing around at the assembled guests a moment, he then began to talk. "Welcome all to a banquet in honor of the return of our son Nathaniel, whom we never thought to see again." He gestured to his son, who stood amidst applause from those gathered at the tables. Nate gave the crowd a short bow and then retook his seat. "We are also here to honor and recognize those who helped bring this about. Michael, who befriended Nate in the mines, as well as James and Jiron, who were instrumental in orchestrating his return. We give them our heartfelt thanks and wish them only the best." At this, the crowd broke into another thunderous applause. At Nate's father's direction, James, Michael, and Jiron stood and gave the crowd a bow before returning to their seats. James looked over and saw Meliana giving him a big smile and seemed to be clapping harder than the rest. Once the clapping had subsided, once the applause had subsided, Nate's father said, "Now, let us celebrate with food, drink, and entertainment." Signaling a servant standing at the edge of the room, he said, "Let the celebration begin." Okay, while I was reading this, see, I read it the night before I do this, and I make corrections, even though I'm still making corrections now. But two things in this scene came to mind. One, shouldn't they be speaking the Empire's tongue? And James, Jiron, and Michael, they don't know how to speak the Empire's tongue, yet they can talk to everybody. And that really bothered me when I was reading it. I was like, oh man, that I screwed up, right? But then I'm thinking, this is a trading city, and all these people in here are traders. So I'm assuming that with Matic and Cardri Cardri anyway, as major trading partners or destinations, that they would know the language. And they're doing the banquet in that language in respect to the people who save their son. That's how I'm getting, that's how I'm rationalizing it. When I wrote it, that had never occurred to me. But yeah, that's what I'm wrestling. The second thing is, okay, Nate was a slave, right, of the Empire. They live in the Empire. Whatever, something Nate did caused him to be a slave, whatever the reason. And that reason and the judgment that put him in slavery is still in effect, right? So they just announced to everybody that they stole this guy from the slave mines at Sorna. And I'm tempted to go back and change that, but I like the way it is, because someone's bound to say something, and they're going to want to, and the warrior priests will probably want to get to back at James and such, and if they know that these guys are friends of theirs, well, that could go bad. But I never went that route. That never occurred to me when I was writing, but it occurs to me now. But I'm not going to go back and change it. What are your thoughts? Is that a plot hole? Is that an issue? Did anyone else notice that too? I'm just curious. All right. At that, the band struck up a merry tune, and doors opened as servants entered bearing trays overflowing with food. Roast pig, chickens, a veritable cornucopia of food began to be laid upon the tables. Servants with pitchers passed among the guests to fill everyone's glass. One came and filled James's with a sweet, smooth wine reminiscent of the one he'd become plastered with back when he'd first met Miko and Baron. Memories of the hangover that had plagued him throughout the following day made him take only small sips during the meal. Michael filled his plate to overflowing, much to the amusement of Nate as he tried to eat some of everything placed before him. During dinner, entertainers came and performed within the open area surrounded by the tables. Acrobats, magicians, and dancers came and went as the meal progressed. Once most of the guests had slowed down on their consumption of the bounty, the entertainers were cleared away. People made their way toward the center of the floor as the band struck up a waltz-like tune. People made their way toward the center of the floor as the band... People made their way to the center of the floor as the band struck up a waltz-like tune, and the dance portion of the evening commenced. The dancing was similar in nature to those James had seen in old movies of England, all structured and choreographed. The dancers moved in a pattern, weaving and bobbing in time to the music. What I was thinking was Barry Bostwick. He did a miniseries called The George Washington, and in it there were the people did dances, right? And then they did the dances and they twirled, and that's what I had in mind when I was doing this. When the first dance ended and the musicians were preparing to begin the next set, Miriam came to James and said, "Why don't you ask Mariana to dance?" I guess that should be asked, not said. He glanced over to her and saw her looking eagerly at him. Hang on one second. See, I had it. He glanced over to her and saw her looking over to him. But I had over to and over to, so that's redundant. I hate redundancy. My first book originally, I got a case of them. The very first incarnation of the unsuspecting maids. Oh, it's rough. I'm surprised anybody read it. It's changed now. You can't get that copy anymore. Maybe I'll auction it off someday if I become famous. He glanced over to her and saw her looking eagerly at him. He turned back to Miriam and with a face of a shade redder said, I don't know any of these dances. Don't be silly, she said. They're not hard. He felt a nudge in the ribs and heard Jiron say, let's go. He grabbed James's arm as he propelled him toward the dance floor. Toward the dance floor. Meliana saw him leaving his table, and when she got a nod from Miriam, said something to her father. She made her way toward him through the crowded dance floor. When she reached his side and got into position to dance with him, he told her, I can't dance. And when I was James's age, I couldn't dance either. I can dance now, but I can't dance either. Relax and just follow me, she said to him. It's easy. I'll show you what to do. He stood nervously with Meliana standing in line across from him and Jiron in position to his right. When the music started, he tried to follow Meliana's lead and felt like he was making a big spectacle of himself in front of everyone. But as he began to learn the steps and the pattern of the dance, he was able to relax and start enjoying himself. By the time the dance was over, he had the pattern figured out and found that he actually liked dancing. Of course, the fact he danced with a girl as beautiful as Meliana helped some. Once the dance concluded, Meliana took him over to her table where she sat with her family. Mama, she said to the woman sitting next to her father, this is James. She gave him the critical once-over all mothers give those their daughters have interest in. Then she gave him a warm smile as she said, nice to meet you, James. I wonder if the warm smile was due in part with knowing that James was leaving in the morning. Okay. You too, ma'am, he replied, blushing slightly under her scrutiny. You dance well, she said. I just wish I could get my husband out there. Turning to her, her husband said, you know I hurt my leg this morning. Nodding, she said, yes, dear. She gave James a knowing look and continued, he'll do anything to get out of dancing. Meliana's father just gave her an annoyed look and didn't take the bait. The band was in the middle of another dance number when they finished. The band was in the middle of another dance number, and when they finished, Meliana took James's arm. With a quick farewell to her parents, she dragged him back to the dance floor before the band had a chance to start again. They danced all evening, occasionally taking a break for drinks or just to talk. She didn't leave his side all night. At the end of one dance, her mother came to them and said, we need to be leaving now. She turned to James and said, would you be so kind as to escort Meliana home when she is ready? Yes, ma'am, he assured her. I'd be happy to. Good, she replied. Turning to her daughter, she said, your father's leg is hurting, so we must leave. Don't stay out all night, dear. I won't, mother, she assured her. Good evening, James, she said to him. It was nice to meet you. You too, ma'am. Her mother returned to their table where she helped her father to his feet, and they left the hall. The rest of the evening was spent dancing and talking as they shared past experiences. During one such break, James discovered Miriam had somehow gotten Miko out onto the dance floor. How she had done it, he'd like to know. Miko looked positively frightened and lost out there. When the dance was over, he beat a retreat back to a seat next to Nate. Miriam saw James watching and gave him a mischievous smile. He smiled back and then resumed talking with Meliana. By the time most of the guests had left, James figured it was about time to take her home. He went to Miko and said, I'll be escorting Meliana home now. Would you like to come with us? Shaking his head, Miko replied, I'm going to see Nate to his room and then stay there for a while before turning in. Very well, James said, as disappointed. As much as he liked Meliana, he was just a little scared of being alone with her. He saw Jiron over to the side of the dance floor talking to a couple girls and made his way over to him. When he asked if he'd like to go with them, he just said no. But what will her parents think if she's with me all by herself? They wouldn't have asked you to take her home if they were concerned about you. Oh, I suppose you're right, he admitted. That thought had never occurred to him. He looked over to where Meliana and Miriam stood talking near the front doors. He left Jiron and made his way over to them. They stopped speaking when he approached. As he joined them, Miriam said, well, I better go and see how Nate's doing. Michael's going to see him to his room and stay with him for a while. I better check anyway, she said. She gave Meliana a hug and said, goodbye. I'm so glad you were able to come. Glancing briefly at James, Meliana gave a little smile and said, me too. She slid her arm through James's as they walked out into the warm summer evening. Where do you live? He asked, feeling good with her on his arm. And I have to tell you, it feels good to have a lady on your arm. Guys, if you're not walking with your lady on your arm, man, you gotta start doing it. Oh, it's not too far from here. Pointing down the street to the right, she said, it's several blocks that way. Turning into the indicated direction, he slowly rolled along the street. There were other guests from the banquet walking along the street as well, while others rode in carriages on their way home. It's too bad you're leaving in the morning, Meliana said with disappointment as she laid her hand on his shoulder. Yeah, I know, he replied. It's been nice being here. Maybe you could stay longer, she asked hopefully. I wish I could, but I'm unable to, he explained. I need to help get Jiron and Miko out of the Empire and back home. I understand, she said. Maybe when things change, you could come back and visit? Perhaps, he said, but that is highly unlikely. Disappointment colored her words when she said, I suppose you're right. Arm in arm, they walked down the street until they came to her house. A light was on in the front room. Mother is waiting up for me, it looks like, she said as they came to the front door. I guess this is where we say goodbye. Suddenly, she embraced him and placed her lips upon his, giving him a warm and eager kiss. When she disengaged, James was left breathless and more than a little flustered. I'll miss you, she told him. I'll miss you too, he said when he finally got his voice working. She turned and opened the door when she paused and said, Goodbye, James. Goodbye, Meliana, he replied as he watched her enter and close the door. Man, don't girls have a way to keep them in our thoughts? Giving him a big old fat kiss, right? She knew what she was doing. Feeling all warm and fuzzy inside, he's made his way back toward Nate's family estate. Visions of Meliana and the way her lips felt on his filled his mind until he realized he stood before the door to his room. He didn't even remember walking back. He must have been on autopilot. Opening the door, he found Jiron snuggled in his bed with one of the serving girls he'd been seeing. How'd it go? He asked from the bed, not the least bit embarrassed. It went well. Want me to leave? Don't have to if you don't want to, he replied. We're done anyway. James went over to his bed and got undressed in the dark and then slipped under the covers. Thoughts of Meliana kept him awake long into the night before he finally fell asleep. And that ends chapter 1. So, just a little bit of a social thing, getting more feel of the world, introducing Meliana. Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't really recall thinking that, okay, this is going to, they're going to continue this. I thought it was a one-off thing. But yeah, I wonder if maybe Igor had a hand in that. Trying to keep James in that world. Arranging for Miriam to have a best friend who was perfect for James. Or perfect in a way that he would be totally attracted to her and wouldn't stop thinking about her. Because maybe Igor thought there would be more to do than what he's doing now. That just occurred to me, actually. That's not part of my plot, but the way I've got the gods working in this series, that's entirely possible. That Igor, is trying to manipulate James and staying. What are your thoughts? Gods work in mysterious ways, right? Well, that ends chapter 1. I'll do chapter 2 tomorrow. I really missed this, and I shouldn't have stayed away so long. I originally stopped doing it because I was afraid that because I read chapters out loud when I edit my books, and I thought if I did this and that, it would really. But all it did was cause me to get into a funk. So I'm back, and I'll be writing on Relic of the Ancients after this one. It's got some really good moments in it. It has some really good moments. I know I don't write fast books, but some of the best moments in this book I think of as time progresses, and I have a chance to mull on things. Like the next series, and yes, there is a next series. I just thought of something for that series that is going to be awesome. Anyway, subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, just subscribe. You'll get it. And when you subscribe, click the bell, do the very top bell, and you'll be notified whenever I post something. More subscribers I get, the more these will be spread in YouTube's world. And right now I probably get 10, maybe 20, you know, within 24 hours of views, sometimes less than that. But, well, 45 minutes, my God. Welcome back. Y'all take care. If you got comments, I love to hear them. If you got questions, I'll answer them if I can. And y'all take care. Oh, there's snow out there. Yay, snow.